So Rabbi Tatz is describing to us these ideas of the greater the person is, so more by a hair's breadth he's going to be judged. And the people of later generations who cannot compare to this great tzaddik, this righteous person at all, we have no right to cast our judgments on what the actions of that person were, because we can't understand our world compared to his world, or we can't understand his world compared to our world. Like we mentioned in the last class, and this I remember hearing this in the early days of Yiddishkeit, that you can't fathom who Dovid HaMelech was, who King David was. The man was a man of kedusha, of holiness, of sanctity that is so far beyond even the greatest tzaddik of our generation. You can't fathom. And if Dovid HaMelech would walk into this world right now, you would not be able to look at him because the light would be so great. And if he would look around and see what's going on, most likely he would just burn up the world with the fires of holiness that were coming out of his eyes. So we are the Yerida Siddharas, we're generations down the chain, the spiritual chain of existence, and therefore we can't even relate to what they did. It looks like in the Torah, Dovid HaMelech did a sin, but then Chazal, the sages, tell us in the Gemara, whoever says that David sinned is mistaken. Well, what do you mean? The Torah says he sinned. No, that means when the Torah is judging Dovid HaMelech, when Hashem is judging Dovid HaMelech, Hashem is allowed to say, David, you sinned. But we are coming 2,500 years later, we don't have a right to accuse Dovid HaMelech of doing a sin, because we can't understand the distance between our world and his world, and therefore he is held to a much higher pedestal of judgment by Hashem. Now he gets into the next set of sinners that he wants to examine. And he says, this is true of all the sins that we have in the Torah. Meaning, if the Torah says that something is a sin, the Torah is allowed to say that it's a sin. We are possibly, very likely, not able to say it's a sin the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. Sometimes the careful reading of the Torah text will make this clear even before the Talmud puts things in the correct perspective. Meaning, we had a generation that was the generation of the desert, right? The Jewish people had to wander in the midbar, in the wilderness, for 40 years. And one of the first things that they did wrong was they got thirsty and they asked for water. And they're called failures in the Torah for doing so. HaKadosh Baruch Hu reprimands them very harshly for complaining that they have no water. Remember, they just left Har Sinai. They're traveling, even before Har Sinai. They left Mitzrayim. They're traveling now in the wilderness. They go 3 days without water. They're thirsty. And they start complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu, what's this all about? You should have let us die in Egypt. It's much better over there. At least we had water. What's going on over here? So Rav Tan says like this. Only when 3 days without water presented the prospect of imminent death for them, and the children would ask them when water would appear, they found themselves branded as failures in the area of faith. Meaning the following. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to the Jewish people, why are you complaining and asking about water? Don't you know that Hashem is the one that's going to provide for us? He took care of us this far. So where's your trust? You're the nation that just walked out of Egypt. You saw miracle after miracle after miracle in your life. Hashem destroyed the Egyptians and He let you live. He split the sea, you walked right through. There was fresh water that was dripping down from the sides. You could drink whatever you wanted. You got hungry. You reached out. There were fruit trees in the walls of the split sea. You could take a fruit and eat along the way. Hashem made miracles for you. You know that He takes care of you. Why are you complaining right now? Why are you getting upset? Why are you getting worried that maybe there's not going to be water? Did Hashem let you down this far? He took you as a slave nation out of Egypt. He lifted you up to the highest of heights. He took care of all your needs. What are you worried about? Water? Hashem can't make water? At their level, facing death should have constituted a minor ordeal. Okay, 3 days we don't have water. Fine, they should have said. But we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of us this time. It couldn't be that He took us out of Egypt, made all the signs and all the wonders, just let us die out of thirst in the wilderness right now. So the criticism that follows their failure shows that. Meaning, it should have been a small thing, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, what are you complaining about? Why are you doing this? Meaning, they should not have flipped their lid, so to speak, in the wilderness and got upset that there's no water. But a small-minded and superficial view reads the passage as an account of people who constantly moan and complain. So what do? Oh, the Jewish people, they're complainers, they moan, they complain. Look at them, they're just like us. We also kvetch. We also complain. No, they were never satisfied, they were always ungrateful, ready to fail every challenge at the merest provocation. Is that true? Meaning a person has an image of what the Jewish people were like in the wilderness. We said that they were the generation of complainers. Every time you open up the Chumash, they are complaining again. Is that really true? He says that the fact is that the generation that lived in the wilderness, how many times in the 40 years that they were there, how many times did they sin? In 40 years. It's a Mishnah. How many times did they sin? Pasuk, I think, says 10 times. In 40 years, the entire nation of the Jewish people sinned only 10 times. It's not a slight achievement, says Rabbi Tatz. That's pretty darn good, as they say. If your track record is 40 years, 10 sins, so that's, 0.4 sins a year? Something like that? That's not bad at all. And yet we, who open up our Arskal Chumash, oh, look at these complainers. Who do these people think that they are? Don't they realize Hashem takes care of them? What are they complaining about and kvetching about? We're supposed to be a grateful nation. 10 times in 40 years. Okay, they had a couple of misfalls over here. They had a couple of mishaps. They did complain about the water, but what were they complaining about? And it's true, they did go and they spied out the land, and they came back and they spoke Lashon Hara. Okay, and it was a big mistake, and it cost us a lot. But it was one massive mistake in 40 years. We're making like 40 mistakes every day of our life. Halavai, it's only 40. But we're sitting around and we're judging the Jewish people for what they did in the wilderness. He said, when it's clear that those sins were perpetrated at the highest level by a people capable of reaching into the rarefied realm of face-to-face meeting with Hashem, meaning these were the highest level of the Jewish people. They were just coming from Har Sinai. They're elevated, they're prophets. They know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It becomes apparent that the criticism must be measured by a different rule. If God is criticizing them, it's because God's allowed to criticize them. Because He knows what He gave them. He knows the level that He lifted them up to, how He elevated them. But we, sitting in Tarzana, California, on a Wednesday afternoon, and I'm sure that everybody's proud of themselves that they, even though it's 45 degrees outside and it's the ground is still a little bit wet, you say, okay, I'm going to push myself, I'm going to come to class. And you get a lot of reward for coming to class today. Because for a Tarzanian, on a rainy, cold day, who goes out of his house and he comes to learn, George, you're excluded because you're recovering from knee surgery, but that's a big deal. That's a very big deal. But for the Jewish people in the generation of the wilderness, it rained. Well, first of all, the weather was perfect, but even if it would have rained, what's the big deal? You hear stories about the Jews in Europe from before the turn, before World War II. There was no plumbing, there was no running water, electricity was sparse as could be. But that's how they lived. So if it was pouring rain and there's rain coming in through the tin roof that you have in your house, and it's the morning and you have to go daven, so you get up and you go daven. The roads are muddy, the streets are muddy, it's cold, you don't have you don't have down jackets the way that we have today. Right? This is in LA, it's 45 degrees, people are walking around in mink coats today. Yeah, they didn't have any of that, but that was life. So that's what they did. So if a guy would go to shul at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning in Poland in 1933, when it was 2 degrees outside, so he said, that's what we do. Of course that's what we do. So the later the generations are, the less that we're used to doing things with dedication and sacrifice and the like. So then in our generations we get more reward for those things. You can't imagine how much reward you get for being here today, even though you got into your warm car in your warm clothes and you drove here and the parking lot is right next to the door and it's easy to be here. But it's a mysterious nefesh. It's already sacrificed. Now that means that what Rabbi Tatz is saying is that we cannot understand the people of the Torah. We cannot fathom where they were living. We can't understand the lofty heights that their neshamas, that their souls achieved and reached. So when we see in our mind, which looks like a childish display of complaining or whining or getting disappointed or getting frustrated, it just means we don't really understand the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is evaluating and telling over the story. And he leaves it that way. So if you want to make a mistake, you can make a mistake. But if you get more into this world of understanding the world of BECHIRA, free will, and why it is that certain people did certain things over the history of the world, so then we understand that the greater, farther back the nation is, the farther back the people are, the higher the level they are on, and therefore we, in this generation, we don't have a right to come and to criticize them for what they did. And that's really what he's gonna get into over here. I'll just leave off with this because it's next week's parsha, and next week we're going to get to the Cheta Egel, the sin of the golden calf. It's not this week; it's next week. It's the sin of the golden calf, and this is something that bothers every person who reads the Chumash. Is bothered by this. I don't understand. They just came from Har Sinai, and they're standing really at the foot of Har Sinai, and we know the first mitzvah in the Ten Commandments is believe in Hashem, and the second one is there should be no graven images before you. Don't serve idols. Then Moshe Rabbeinu goes up to Mount Sinai, and he disappears for 40 days and 40 nights, and they make a miscalculation when exactly he's supposed to come down, and they thought that he's not coming, and then they go and they build the golden calf. They build a golden graven image and idol. And everyone's like, what? What's wrong with these people? Don't they understand? It says in the Seres that you're not allowed to build an idol. How could they build an idol? So Rabbi Tatz points out that you have to know what they were doing, and then you have to understand why, even though that what they were doing was not necessarily a wrong thing, for them was such a grave sin. And he quotes some different verses over there to point out, but they were not trying to make a god in place of Hashem. God forbid they were doing such a thing. They were not creating avodah zarah. You have to look at the Ramban over there, Nachmanides, and he explains it clearly. They were not trying to make a new god out of gold who's going to be a calf. They wouldn't think such a ridiculous thing. They knew Hashem. When they were crossing the sea, they were able to point to the Shekhinah and said, this is my God, I will glorify him. Rather, they were concerned that Moshe Rabbeinu died up on Har Sinai. And as far as they knew, the only way that they could really have direct contact with God was if there was an intermediary between them and Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu was the one, he was the mouthpiece, he was the shaliach, he was the messenger, he was the one that was between them and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's how it worked from the time that he revealed himself in Egypt. They were afraid because the Satan, the evil angel of death, came along and showed a premonition in the sky that the coffin of Moshe was coming down from Har Sinai, that Moshe died up there on Mount Sinai, and he fooled them. So they said, how are we going to have a connection with Hashem? We're not on that level like Moshe had, where we can just go and talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that we want. So we need Elohecha, he writes. We need a God, not a God, but that word Elohecha means we need a spokesman who will be the liaison between us and Hashem. And so for mystical reasons, he writes over here, it was with gold and it was a calf, and therefore they made the calf in order just to take the place of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be their conduit between them and Hashem, not to make a god, chas v'shalom. But in the eyes of Hashem, and the eyes of Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe is the one who comes and he smashes the commandments when he sees what's going on their level, in their world of Torah, it was the wrong thing. And then he writes over here, if you look carefully, shortly after that, we're commanded to build the Mishkan, and in the Mishkan we're commanded to make kruvim, which are these angelic figures, a boy and a girl, with gold. So it says Rav Tatz, that's like, it's almost like making the golden calf. And Hashem's commanding them to do such a thing. So you see that they understood there's something that they're allowed to do. However, despite all the arguments justifying their actions, at their level of greatness, they were guilty of nothing less than idolatry. We can't say that because we don't understand what they were going through. But the Torah can say, you're idolaters. What are you doing? Hashem said, don't make any graven images. What are you doing? But we don't want it. I know why you're saying you wanted to make it. But in my eyes, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's what you've done is tantamount to idolatry. Only Hashem can say that we can't make such a criticism. Okay, we'll finish hopefully next time this chapter, and we'll continue moving through. What? Again, condoned means that he understood that they're not making a god over here. He apparently wasn't the man for the job, apparently. But again, they're punished. They're punished from Hashem. From Hashem. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're in pleasure. We'll see you next week, God willing.
On the fast day.
Yes. What else are you going to do? You're going to